was going to show at the beginning, me doing thumbs up. Um, but anyway, um, so let's introduce Mr. Dr. John Zelem, Managing Organizational Silos, a Puzzle You Can Solve. This presentation will draw an analogy between building a puzzle, managing organizational silos, and talking about the three distinct methods of puzzle building: laying out the edges first, laying out all the pieces, and building the sectors, and then relating them to strategies for breaking down and integrating silos within organizations. So, Dr. John Zelem, I will turn it over to you, and you may now share screen, my friend.
All right, let's see if I could do it correctly.
No worries. We always do a dry run with the speakers, and you did a great job on Monday.
All right, so let me put the presentation over there.
Yep. Yes. Like us, we all have multiple monitors. So you kind of have to dodge around that. I have like 4 of them, 5 of them, actually.
I just have a laptop and one monitor.
Oh, awesome. And just pop that in show mode, and that'll be great.
Yeah, let's see how it looks and how it works. Ha!
Perfect.
Son of a gun. It's nice when a plan comes together.
I love it. All right, I'll turn it over to you, my friend, and I will mute myself.
From those of you who are old enough to remember the show, The A-Team, that's where that phrase came from. So we're going to talk a little bit today about managing organizational silos, which is a puzzle you really can solve. And just let me give you some background as to how I got into dealing with managing organizational silos. I worked for a major corporation for 13 years, and as part of that, I did a lot of consulting. And they, in their kindness, decided to let me go, not for the fact that I wasn't doing a good job, but they wanted to please their stockholders, which, you know, many of these big companies do that. They think more of their stockholders than their employees. And if I sound bitter, well, yeah, maybe. But the reality is that when I first got laid off, I was trying to work my way towards learning things. And I come from a healthcare background. Obviously, the fact that I'm a physician, but then I got into healthcare, and I cut my teeth with one organization, a hospital system out of Virginia, where we were working on, for those of you, I don't know how much you know about healthcare organizations, but even if you don't, we're going to go through some of it, and it's the concepts, not necessarily the details, that make a challenge. But I started learning how two major components, utilization review and case management, were siloed. And then I started developing the concept over the years, and have gradually, since 2020, enlarged my knowledge of it, enlarged my teachings on it, et cetera. So, and I'm a big puzzle builder. I used to like to build 2,000-piece puzzles, but the challenge was that I've run out of space to put a 2,000-piece puzzle. So that's a little bit of the background of how this all came about. So let's move on to the next slide. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk. That was part of the introduction. There's more for the introduction, but where do silos originate? Because it really is a learned behavior. Most people don't realize that, but it's something that we started learning right from our youngest years of living. And then we need to understand what organizational silos are. What is the cost of silo thinking? How does it affect your business, no matter the size of your business, et cetera? Then we're going to talk about holism, because holism, you know, you hear all the time on television or advertisements, we have a holistic concept. Well, what is holism? What does it really do? Excuse me. And it becomes the key to integration. How do you identify that you have you all have silos in your organizations, but how do you identify what the symptoms are that are causing negative challenges? We'll talk a little bit about communication and structural barriers. Then we'll get into the puzzle analogy, the visual framework, and as already mentioned, the 3 methods, at least in my mind, for building puzzles, and then breaking them down. But once you break down these silos, you can't leave them that way. You have to rebuild them. And we'll get into the 6 areas that are part of rebuilding them and integrating them. Now, As far as I'm concerned, and we'll go into this in a little bit more detail, and there may be times that I repeat myself. Some of the knowledge that I give you in one slide, may appear again in another slide, but excuse me because I always say that my memory only goes back as far as supper last night, and that's debatable. But the human body is really the best analogy for holism and understanding it. We'll go through a couple of industry case studies, and then I'm going to mention something that is a whole nother topic that my brother and I have worked on, and it's called prevention versus correction. And because people spend so much time correcting things, and it's over and over again instead of preventing them from occurring. And then we'll go through some final stops and action steps. I will be available for questions. I'll hang on at the end for questions. And also, the last slide will give you some information on how to contact me. So let's move on. So, one of the worst things they say about doing a presentation, especially a PowerPoint presentation, is to read the slide while the audience is reading it too. So I may end up doing that, and pardon that poor performance on that part, but I think sometimes reading it helps it stand out more. So what is an organizational silo? It's actually a term that's used to describe a situation where different departments, teams, or units within a company, no matter the size of the company, they operate in isolation from one another, most of the time unintentionally. These groups end up having their own goals, systems, tools, or processes, but they don't know how to effectively share information or collaborate or align with the broader organizations of the objectives of the organization, which is a key factor. They typically tend to operate on their own objectives for their team, unit, or whatever, instead of what are the overall objectives of the organization. And we'll get into it. But if you want to think about it, a silo is like a department with walls around it. Everyone inside can talk to each other, but few people talk across the walls into the other surrounding departments. So why are silos a problem? And realize again, we'll get into the silo concept, if you will, or you may already realize that you have them within your own organization, but they tend to disrupt the natural flow of communication and collaboration. And for an organization to work uh, efficiently, there has to be communication. And when we get into the human body as an example of holism and the holistic concept, you'll understand better what the flow of communication and collaboration should be. But this leads to inefficiencies. This leads to miscommunication and fragmented culture because people think about their area. They don't think of how it fits in with other areas or how you could all work together. And they often form from good intentions. There's nothing to say that silos forming is a bad thing, and we'll get into that. But the intentions are focus, specialization, and efficiency. Efficiency becomes extremely important, but becoming barriers over time become limiting growth and adaptability. I don't know how I screwed up that sentence, but I guess I did. Um, require a shift from and silos require a shift from siloed thinking to systems thinking. You got to get away from yourself and realize that you're not as important as you think you are. So the key characteristics of an organizational silo is limited communication with other departments. And I'll get into the example of clinical revenue cycle in healthcare because that, as I say, that's where I cut my teeth. But there's actually 5 organizations there, but they don't talk to each other. They all look at the same documentation, physician documentation, but they only look at it through their own lens. And what happens is you can end up with redundant or duplicated work due to this lack of coordination. And the goals, they're misaligned. The goals are typically aligned for your team, your individuals, your organization, but not with the overall strategy. So that ends up providing problems inefficient decision making because critical information is trapped in one area. And with a later slide, I'll give you a great example of a silo that can have these problems. And then, of course, culture always comes into play, and then territorial behavior, and that can tend to discourage collaboration. So let's talk about the origin of silos. You know, years ago, I kept thinking to myself, all right, these silos exist. They seem to be a learned behavior, but where does this all come from? So silos really start early, and I'll give you a diagram which shows it. And the reason why are so deeply ingrained is because they do start early. When you look at school, we're taught to separate by subjects, roles, and grades. Society reinforces these divisions through majors and job titles. So that's when you get to, further on in life, that's where you get to your organization. And those job titles and majors actually reinforce these divisions. So silos reflect how we've been trained to think and work. And no matter how we want to think about it, we can't escape it. It's as ingrained as learning how to walk. Um, they're mental models, and I think that's important because it's a mental situation which results in these organization, excuse me, which results in these organizational structures. So here's an example of where these silos come from. So if you look at ages 3 to 6, there's categorization and labeling in early childhood. I'm not going to get into any of these things that are going on today and actually, I'm not going to even mention it because I don't think it's pertinent to this organization. But from ages 3 to 6, we're kind of learning different categorizations that we belong in. Then we get to ages 6 to 11. That's typically grammar school. And grammar school does have a separation, or elementary school does have a separation of the academic subjects. They're separated, but they're not separated. You typically have one teacher. That one teacher gives homework assignments that are, of course, I don't know if my grandkids don't get much in the way of homework anymore, and they fall into that 6 to 11 category. But the homework is balanced. So if there's a lot of homework in one subject, there'll be less in another. But you all stay in all the students stay in the same classroom. They stay, they don't go anyplace else, and they have one teacher for all these subjects. Now, I have not been exposed to grammar school, so there may, in a long time, a very long time, but there may be modifications of that in today's world. But in ages 6 to 11, it's pretty clear cut. And then we move on to the ages 12 to 18, which would be middle and high school. And it's a change. It really is a change because you may have different teachers for each subject, or a teacher per subject. Each teacher, um, each teacher gives out homework assignments, and they don't really care what the other teachers are assigning. Their subject is the most important, and that's what you have to work with. So, and it's typically a different classroom too. And if you go to a high school that I did, there was more than just the students were in different classrooms. It actually was one of the older schools, St. Joe's in Trouble, which initially, when it started, they separated the boys and the girls. It was a boys and girls high school, but the first floor was all boys, the second floor was all girls, and the third floor was split half and half. But one half was all boys, one half was all girls. So if you want to talk about silos during that period of time, there's a perfect example of it. So then you get to ages 18 to 22, which starts getting into college and universities. And it just takes the whole concept of a different teacher, and it may be different teachers for the same subject, different homework assignments, et cetera. So it's taking that silo concept to a whole nother level. So as you just look at those four categories at the beginning, how could this not be ingrained into our thinking and have it not even be requiring rethinking? It is automatic. It's just there. We've learned it. We exercise it. Then the next thing is your early careers, and it depends upon where you work, but typically there are different departments. Each department has a different role. Getting into each department may have its own workplace entry, or the building itself may have its own workplace entry. In today's world of a lot of remote work and working from home, that's not as important. But working from home can be its own silo unto itself also. And then when we get to mid to senior level, there is what we hope to get in what we will talk about is a normalization of organizational silos. Now, one of the things that I would suggest, if you do have questions as we're moving along that are urgent that you don't want to save to the end, I think Olivia, since you're kind of monitoring the whole situation, if you could, questions can be put in the chat, which I think is the best place to put it. Uh, and Olivia, feel free to interrupt me with what seems to be an urgent question. So the one thing you have to keep in mind, not to be a pun, silo busting begins in the mind long before it takes place on an organizational chart. And you have to think about that because you have to think about silo busting. And again, it's not a bad thing. And silos are not necessarily a bad thing, but silos do need to be broken down in the way that they exist. And it depends upon how they exist in your company. So it begins in the mind long before it appears on your organizational chart. So let's talk a little bit about some of the gaps that occur, some of the things that can happen with silos in an organization. So you can end up with leadership gaps, which can critically affect structure, but not necessarily collaboration. Structure is very important. And again, when we get to talk about the human body and we talk about a holistic approach, structure becomes very important. So these leadership gaps, if your leaders encourage silos, if your leaders encourage some teams to do something and other teams to do something else without collaboration, there are gaps that occur there. Um, Number two, structural hierarchies. Rigid hierarchies significantly hinder collaboration and influence the structure. And you may have people at different levels, and the higher levels don't want to work with the lower levels, or vice versa, or they don't. One of the things that um, managers managers don't necessarily know how to deal with these hierarchies because they're trying to change the processes, they're trying to change the results. And interestingly, these silos, if you will, they know what the problems are in an organization, and they develop workarounds. And so they know what the problems are, and they've learned how to solve them over time. But the thing is that the manager very seldom gets involved with these workarounds, but they have to deal with the consequences of the problems. And then you have culture, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on culture because it's become such a big issue lately. But culture does play a role. And no matter which part of the culture you're from, and every organization has its own culture. And moving from one organization, or maybe even from one team to another team, may be a change of culture. And one talk that I listened to was the CEO of a hospital, and she said something that really struck me. She said that culture is not, see if I could get this right. Culture is not learned. It is, I'm gonna screw this. Culture is learned. It's not taught. That's the what she said. Culture is not taught, it is learned. And many times it may take up to 6 months to learn a new culture, especially if there are changes in your organization. And lastly, communication. Communication is so important. And what happens is that poor communication amongst these silos hinders this collaboration, which we talked about, and also will hinder structure. So we'll get into that in another slide also. It's important to note that silos aren't always the result of poor intentions. In fact, they often arise from a desire to be efficient or to specialize. But when specialization comes at the cost of integration, the organization suffers. So you may have one team that has their own method of dealing with things, and they don't want to share it with another team because that team may do better than they do. But instead, they should collaborate and get together in order to work collaboratively, to work efficiently, and to with the goals of the organization being the ultimate. So here's why silos aren't always bad. They do, and this gets back to what I was trying to say in some of the previous slides. Silos can provide structure and clarity for roles, responsibilities, and goals. And you could see that there are certain roles that have certain responsibilities and they have certain goals, or a team. And a silo actually helps provide for this structure and clarity for these components. Silos can encourage deep specialization and expertise within a function. So and as I get into, I think it's the next slide, as I get into an example, this deep specialization and expertise can be very important. And you'll call it a silo, but as it gets integrated, if it exists unto itself, then it's a problem. But if it gets integrated and managed holistically, it's it's important. And I think when I give you the example, you'll understand that. It does also support focus execution without unnecessary distraction. So this is what you're supposed to do. This is your job. These are your responsibilities. And hopefully, as you execute those responsibilities, you don't deal with unnecessary distractions. It also enables accountability within teams for specific outcomes, because the problem is many times there is no accountability for what needs to be done. And then lastly, it creates an identity and culture that can foster team cohesion and pride. So all of those things come into play group wise within a silo, but it's also the fact that the silo should not be isolated unto itself. So let me give you a good example. We're all familiar with medicine. We're all familiar with physician specialties like cardiology, neurology, orthopedic, surgery, infectious disease, anesthesiology, geriatrics, and more. So if we go back to the previous slide where we talked about uh, deep specialization and expertise within a function, this is a perfect example because each one of these subspecialties, I never know why they call them subspecialties because they really are specialties. But each one of these specialties has its own knowledge base, its own information, its own direction, and they actually do function individually. But here's the kicker, if you will. What if there was no communication between these specialties? So you have an internal medicine person who has a patient admitted, they get a cardiology consult, they may get an orthopedic consult, they may get a neurology consult, depending upon what the diagnosis is. Well, each one, and when those consults are called, those specialists actually look at the patient from their point of view, and they don't look at it in a way to look at the overall picture many times. I mean, the orthopod who's fixing a broken hip doesn't really care so much about what the cardiologist is doing unless he must have the cardiologist clear the patient in order to have the surgery. But once the surgery is done, the orthopod doesn't want to deal with the fact that the patient has problems with diabetes or the patient has problems with their blood pressure. They are specialized. They're in their own niche. But if they don't communicate with the overall picture, in this situation, who suffers? The patient, because they're getting isolated care, not overall care. So communication becomes extremely important with these silos. So again, silos are not necessarily a bad thing, but on the other hand, they there's a lot of good components, but they need to be controlled. And you'll see how we're going to do that as we move forward. So how do we get to organizational inefficiency? Well, there's what happens with silos. There can be a duplication of work. There can be redundant processes, lack of communication. So if you have two different teams basically doing similar work, it's like that phrase that I've always heard. If you and another person have the same thoughts and opinions, well, one of you is unnecessary. And so duplication of work can result in redundant processes and again, lack of communication. But what that can do is it can end up with customer confusion because the customer may be dealing with two different silos and doesn't know which is the one they need to work with. So if you don't align these departments so that they function appropriately, then you're going to have inconsistent messaging. So, for example, a marketing team and a sales team, they may sound similar, but they both have different goals that they need to take care of. This can also result in decreased morale. By the way, I don't know if you noticed this, but this is the fishbone theory, which is great, or this is based on the fishbone theory, which is great for working on problems that an organization might have. But decreased morale resulting from isolation and frustration can result with that. And then lastly, slow execution. And and I'm sure you're familiar with this, that sometimes things get caught up in the bureaucracy. I saw that all the time in hospitals, the bureaucracy that existed there, and that can result in delayed decisions, which can result in again customer confusion. This delayed decision making it gets involved in all of these little phrases that are listed, thus resulting in reduced agility in your organization, not functioning as well and as quickly. Think about this. That Toyota, I don't know if you're familiar with the Toyota principles. I think there's 14 of them. I may have that number wrong, but the Toyota principles, or even just look at a car dealership. If they had silos, then you can imagine the end product being poor, the end product having lots of problems. So they have to solve the problems and have a holistic approach, have an organizational approach that handles these problems as you go along. And one of the things that I love, and I think it's principle number 5 in the Toyota principles, is that any member on the assembly line can stop the assembly line without repercussions if they find a problem that needs to be solved. And I think that's a great way of looking at things and not pointing the finger at somebody and saying, you did it, and they solve the problem. And that reduces the number of recalls that these auto manufacturers have because they address the problems as they come along. So how do you recognize the existence of silos? And the key thing is, in order to do that, you have to do some investigation. You have to find out what are the root causes of what's going on in your organization, in your teams, your individuals, in your departments. Are there conflicting priorities? And each team may have their own priority, which is not necessarily tied to the organizational priorities. And that can result in delayed project timeliness and timelines. Redundant meetings, it wastes time and it wastes time without any progress. You have one team meeting on the same and another team meeting on the same problem and not communicating with each other. So therefore, you have redundant meetings and you have no progress. Also, unawareness of initiatives. If you're not all aware of, let's say, the company initiatives because of your silo, you're only concerned about your own team, it results in duplicate efforts and resources and in a lack of achievement or slow achievement of these initiatives. And then there's the blame culture starts. So it wasn't my fault. It was the other team. No, it was this team. It was this person, et cetera. And what that does is it hinders collaborative problem solving. So, and then disconnection from the goals. It reduces employee motivation and engagement. Now, you could see that managing organizational silos is not an overnight task. Managing organizational silos, again, is a puzzle you can solve, but you need to be aware of it and you need to work on it. And it takes time and energy depending upon the size of your organization, because every organization that's out there has silos of varying degrees. So let's talk about holism. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the people are calling things holistic all the time. And to be honest with you, I don't think they really understand what holism really is. And holism is the idea that an organization works best when all parts are connected and aligned, focusing on the whole, not just individual pieces. So, said differently, no one part, no one team, no one individual is more important than any other or the sum of the whole. And that's the whole purpose behind holism. It becomes the integrator for being able to break down these silos and rebuild them. And we will get into that in more detail in another slide. So holism becomes the key to integration. You need to see the organization as a connected whole, not isolated parts. Let's get back to those physician specialties. They're all silos per se, but they're part of a connected whole, not isolated parts. And working all together, they're taking care of the patient and providing the best care that can be given. That's the best example of silos not being a bad thing that I could think of. But the other thing is holism will promote alignment. It'll help share goals and collaboration across departments. And these departments need to be integrated because that'll ensure that the decisions that are made benefit the entire organization, not just one area. And I'm sure many of you have worked in an organization or a team or a department that really just thinks about their own work, not just and not the entire organization. So you need to encourage systems thinking and understanding the ripple effects across functions. And lastly, holism links departmental expertise with purpose and driving collective success. So let's talk about the human body. This is my favorite example for holism because I really truly believe that it is the best example of holism that exists. Now, the human body is composed of many different organs, many different systems, many different functions. And going back to the definition, no one part is more important than any other part or the sum of the whole. So when looking at the human body, people will say to me, well, the brain's the most important. No, it's not. People say to me, well, then the heart's the most important. No, it's not. Why? Because neither one can function on its own. It's part of an integrated system. Now, you can live without a leg, but that's not a problem. You can live without your tonsils or your appendix, but that's not, or even your gallbladder, but that's not a problem. They're just isolated things that are part of an entire organ system. But the bottom line is that those are just little things that you could function without. but the overall systems of the body need to function so that they're integrated in a holistic manner. When we start talking about holism and we start talking about organizations, there's two things that I think are extremely important: structure and communication. In an organization, you need a structure. In the human body, it's the musculoskeletal system. You need that structure, that um, organizational chart that you have. So you have to have structure, because otherwise everything is going to run free, and there's going to be no coordination and no success. But the other thing is communication. What is the biggest problem that we have in our lives, sometimes in our marriages? Lack of communication. And without communication between these different areas, if we didn't, the communication factor in the human body is the nervous system. And if something disrupts the nervous system in the human body, it falls apart. It doesn't function well. And that's part of some of the diseases that we see are problems with the nervous system and the communication between different organ systems. So if the heart didn't communicate with all of the different organs and the blood supply that it's given, that presents a problem. And again, those are some of the diseases that we see. So structure and communication are extremely important in dealing with a holistic approach and in dealing with organizational silos. So let's get to the actual title of this presentation, the puzzle analogy. And the reason why I love this analogy, because it provides a visual framework. Every team is a puzzle piece, valuable on its own, but essential as a part of the whole. You take one puzzle piece and you look at it compared to the puzzle, it's like, well, it's important, it's valuable, but it's only essential because it's a part of something else. Departmental focus is important, but it must align with the organization's big picture. And the thing is, I think of a puzzle as the perfect example of a gap analysis. And this may come up in a subsequent slide, but while I'm here, a gap analysis. A gap analysis is knowing where you are, knowing where you want to be, but how do you get there? So a puzzle is a perfect example of that, because you know where you are. You have 1,500 pieces. You know where you want to be because you have the picture of what the puzzle must look like at the end. But how do you get from one to the other, which becomes which is the gap analysis? And every way of dealing with a gap analysis may be a little bit different. So holism connects this structure and communication and collaboration into one unified system. So that's why I keep saying that managing organizational silos is like solving a puzzle. You know the goal, you know where you want to be. You should know or learn where you are, but then you have to find the right tools and you have to stay flexible throughout it. True success is collective. Again, no single part outweighs the power of the whole. So managing organizations is much like solving a puzzle. And again, here's my definition of a gap analysis. I knew I had it somewhere, and I know it might get a little repetitious, but you know the end goal, the complete picture, which is the essence of a gap analysis. You work from multiple angles. And here's an important factor: teams working on it versus individuals. Individuals are part of a team, but they can contribute from different perspectives and skill sets. So you need to use the right tools, collaboration platforms, shared goals, consistent communication. And I'll get to this example when I talk about um, um, yeah, sure, if I could remember the word, clinical revenue cycle in the healthcare industry. Each one of those five components has its own IT platform, and those IT platforms don't communicate with each other They're individual and they're only for that department. And in that situation, you need to come up with a collaborative IT platform that puts it all together. And that's not impossible in any organization. It's just you need to be aware of it and you need to be working on it. And then you have to be flexible. You may need to change your approach as the bigger picture becomes clearer. You may need to admit that you were wrong. And for some of us, myself included, that's sometimes hard to do, but you need to be open-minded. Otherwise, you're not going to have any success at all. But on the other hand, each person needs to be open-minded. One of the challenges that I have is stubbornness, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. And that type of stubbornness can be a hazard to managing organizational silos. So let's just talk quickly about the three methods. And they're different but very similar. Method one is laying out all the edges first and then filling in from there. Uh, that's one way of looking at it. Depends upon finding your root causes and how you want to address this. Method two, and I know people who do this, is laying out all the pieces. But if you have a 1,500 piece puzzle like I like to do, that's a lot of pieces to be putting out there, and you need a lot of work, and you certainly need to be able to identify them. But on the other hand, we talked about individuals versus teams. If you have a team working in this situation, that may work out very well. Method number three is my favorite, is building sections first and then filling in between the different sections. So if I have a puzzle, I don't think I have a picture of a puzzle included in this slide deck. But if you have a picture of a puzzle, the one that I'm working on right now has 3 cars, and then it has billboards and things. So what I'm doing is I'm building each car section first, and I'm building each billboard section first. It's a lot of firsts, but I'm working on them individually. But if you think about it, if you have a big organization, what do you do in that situation? Well, you may want to work on one part of the organization first, maybe work on another part of the organization second, or even simultaneously, and there may be a third part, but you're working on each section first. And in this puzzle concept, the reason why I like it is because I build these different sections, but then I can fill in the missing pieces in order to help put it all together. And that's where managing organizational silos, you can work on each silo separately initially, but then bring them all together and fill in the missing pieces to make them collaborative and efficient. So here's an important concept, and breaking down silos and rebuilding them. Breaking down these silos is only half the battle. Once those walls are lowered, they can't stay that way. You can't break down these silos and leave them that way because you're going to lose your organization. You've broken down structure and even maybe in some situation communication. They must be restructured and reconnected holistically and with purpose. So it's important, and we're going to go into the 6 different aspects that come there. So the goal is not to create chaos, but to rebuild silos in a way that promotes integration. And holism is your best methodology for integration. So let's talk about the 6 concepts that need to be kept in mind when rebuilding your silos: cross-functionality, knowledge sharing, cross-pollination, interoperability, standardization, and accountability. And you must take a look at each one of these things. So cross-functionality, you may have 2 different departments, and they may be in theory associated, but they have no idea what each other does. So there's no cross functioning of tasks and duties, because No, one does not understand what the other one is doing. So rebuilding them with cross-functionality encourages departmental interaction and shared project cooperation. It reduces that inability to communicate. Number two is knowledge sharing. Each team, each section, each component has its own wealth of knowledge. But that knowledge is only as it stands, is only good for that one component, for that one team. And if that knowledge is not shared with the other team, that's where you get with duplication of effort. That's where you get with loss of function. So knowledge sharing and help you have a responsibility in your team, and somebody else has a responsibility in their team. But you don't know what they do. They don't know what you do. So you have people working in isolation. If you don't work on trying to share that knowledge between the two teams, yes, each team has its own specialization. Just like the doctors, the specialists, they each have their own knowledge. But they share that knowledge amongst themselves in order to facilitate the patient getting better. And then cross-pollination. What exactly is that? From the animal world, I guess it would be more with the insect world, whichever world you're looking at, is that each team comes up with ideas, and with cross-pollination, the bee takes what the pollen that it gets from one place and incorporates it into another place, which helps things to grow. Well, if you have ideas in one team, but you don't have that, you don't combine it with the knowledge from another team. So actually, one team may come up with an idea that will help solve a problem for the other team. So this cross-pollination fosters innovation through diverse perspectives and ideas and being open-minded. Interoperability. Interoperability is a little bit harder to define, but interoperability ensures seamless integration of systems and processes. So again, I mentioned in clinical revenue cycle, each of the five components has their own platform, but those platforms don't talk to each other. They only take care, the CDI platform only handles CDI. The coding platform only handles the codes that are going to be used for billing. If you can't if you can't make them interoperable and work together, you're just not going to have the success that you would like to have. Standardization, there has to be standardization. There has to be a framework that people are working through, and they need to know what's expected of them and with what's expected of them and how they will fit in with the other teams that they're working with, but not against. And lastly, accountability. People need to be accountable for their activity. In order to do that, you must establish clear roles in order to have this accountability. And if they don't, you can't let somebody get away with something that you won't let somebody else get away with. So that accountability has to be across the board throughout the organization. So the goal is not to erase or destroy silos, but to reimagine them, to integrate them, when they're rebuilt correctly, they become the very structure that enables agility, innovation, and key statement, sustained performance. And that's what we're looking for is sustained performance. We're getting closer. I think I'm close to an hour. Um, but I'll quickly go through the last couple of slides and industry case examples. So I
You do
kept,
have till 7:15, so you can keep
oh,
going.
okay.
That because you started at 6:15, so
Okay, good. I'm glad somebody's holding me accountable.
no worries. Keep
And
going.
that's the standardization.
Mhm.
So in healthcare, I mentioned a number of times clinical revenue cycle. There are five components to clinical revenue cycle. Now, you may not know anything about clinical revenue cycle or healthcare, but that's okay. It's the concept that we're going to talk about that's going to be helpful. The five components are utilization review, case management, clinical documentation integrity, the on-site physician advisor, and coding compliance. These are five components, but they tend to operate in silos. The keys, the cement, if you will, as I always call it, is they're all looking through the same documentation, but they're looking at it through their own lens. Sometimes uh, case management has no clue what utilization review is doing. And that doesn't come into play with clinical documentation integrity because that has to deal with the integrity of the physician documentation, which we're not going to get into because it's a disaster. But the reality is that there's somebody looking at it. Now, each one, the only one that's not a real integral component and not component, separate silo is the on-site physician advisor, because the on-site physician advisor does deal with the other four probably somewhat equally. But the reality is that these teams need to be broken down in the way that we talked about and rebuilt holistically with those six components mentioned in the previous slides. So that's clinical revenue cycle. That's a healthcare example. Let's look at a technology example. So in a tech startup, product development, marketing, and customer support many times operate independently. I know of a few organizations where the marketing department is tasked to go out and start marketing, but product development hasn't told them what's going on. Product development hasn't finished developing the product. And I will tell you that the organization, the corporation that I worked for was classic for marketing something that hasn't been completely developed. And then what happens is then the customer support people have to operate independently because they have to figure out how to support this lack of communication. So one company realigned its teams by implementing cross-functional squads based on user personas. And this is a potential solution. Each squad included a developer, a marketer, design, and customer success agent. So we put them all together. Each one maintained its own specialty, but they worked together for the ultimate success of the organization, which led to faster product iteration, consistent messaging, and better customer satisfaction because everybody had an idea of what each other component knew and was doing and the stage that they were at. So this can occur in technology, but it also can occur in other organizations too. Manufacturing is a fascinating industry in my mind, and I look at how products are built and the machines that are put together to do that. I just find it amazing, and on how they do that. But manufacturing is another example where it's important that procurement, quality assurance, and logistics are important. Now, I'm talking to a quality assurance group. So if you cannot assure quality in what you're doing, then you may as well give up. And I commend you for what you do as an organization in order to work with QA. So by implementing a shared dashboard, and dashboards are important. Dashboards are something that we talk about in one of my other courses that I built with my brother that we call prevention versus correction. But dashboards are important. And so dashboards holding daily stand-ups with all stakeholders, and it helps reduce lead times, improve vendor relationships. There is something called the vendor-customer relationship, which, if you're not aware of, it's something else that's very important. And the relationship between vendors and customers is so important, and it helps enhance and ensure product consistency. These operational synergies in one situation resulted in a 15% increase in on-time delivery. So managing organizational silos plays a significant role in what we're talking about right now. So I mentioned prevention versus correction. This is not a commercial. We've called it PrevCore. It's available. I'll talk to you about it at the end. And I'm not here, what's the word that I want? I'll think of it shortly. I'm not here to try and promote things. That's not my intention. The stuff that I'm going to talk to you about is available if you want more information. That being said, PrevCore, prevention versus correction. We are so busy uh, running on the hamster wheel of correction. That is running and running and running and running and getting nowhere. We should be on the roller coaster of prevention, which is always moving forward, may have its ups and downs and twists and turns, but it's always moving forward. And eventually, we should work to have prevention replace correction. Although there is a place in the work world for correction. If we didn't have organizations that fixed washing machines, that fixed refrigerators, that fixed air conditioning units, that's correction. So it's important. But on the other hand, if you work consistently enough to try and figure out, well, as I mentioned, Toyota has figured a way to help all of these corrections that they're doing be prevented with their end product. Do they prevent 100% of them? Absolutely not. But on the other hand, it works towards more quality and a better product at the end. So correction is reactive. It's relying on it as a primary strategy, and that can be costly and stressful and unsustainable over time. Because if you're constantly fixing things of a product that you produce, then people are going to stop buying it. If I think about how many times when I buy something on Amazon and I look at the reviews and I look at the complaints of people that they say why they wouldn't buy it again, granted, that's a small number, but the minority can speak very loud. So, and prevention is proactive. It's designed to create a healthier, more resilient organization where collaboration, alignment, and transparency are built into the culture. So lastly, in order to provide for a continuous organizational alignment, these are the 5 steps that you need to keep in mind. The goals of the organization need to be aligned across all teams in a holistic manner. And you need to be able to have a process in place, whether it be through dashboards or whatever, to detect when there tends to be some misalignment. And you need to be able to analyze the root causes, constantly review to improve, but empower your teams to do the right thing. So take action today. Start thinking about this. I think it's important. So in order to, here's just 5 steps to keep in mind. If you're thinking about silos, conduct a silo audit. It's easy enough to start looking and see if you have these problems and where they're related to. And then start introducing cross-functional meetings where your different departments start working together with their own specialties, but to try and solve the problem. And then you need to create a visual organizational map. Look at the big picture and work your way down into the smaller details. Start a silo project. A silo project can be the third mechanism for building puzzles, where you take a section at a time, work on it, get it to a point of success, and try and incorporate it into some of the other projects. And then constantly be self-aware and have accountability. So, in summary, managing organizational silos is a puzzle you can solve. It's not that, I won't say it's not that challenging, but it can be extremely necessary for the success of your organization. And I guess I still have 4 to 5 minutes left, but that's all right. I'll give you a break because I've gone through a lot of high level stuff that needs to be digested, and I'm sure. So with that in mind, um, keep in mind that it's the final result that counts. No matter the method that you choose to build your puzzle, no matter the method that you choose to fix your organization, the goal is a completed puzzle, and the goal is a unified organization that functions smoothly and effectively. So, first of all, I thank you for tolerating me for a whole hour, because I know that a lot of this stuff was very high level. I tried to simplify it, but you may have questions, and if you don't want to ask them today, here's my email. send me an email. Just tell me that your question is related to what you heard during this presentation. And if you want to learn more, courses that are available, ebooks, consulting, motivational books, etc. Because I have actually have a couple of motivational books. On my website, there's a product page. And again, I'm not a prostitute. I'm not trying to push you into it. If you want to look at it, great. If you don't, that's your choice completely. But there's a lot that you can learn. There's a course. There's actually over 5 hours worth of educational courses. It's on Udemy. One is on managing organizational silos, and the other one is on PrevCore. We've put together some ebooks, I don't know if any of you know my brother Jim. He was with ASQ, I believe, for quite a while until he moved to Wisconsin. I see that thumbs up. Uh, and Jim I have healthcare consulting as my background. Jim has business as his background. And between the two of us, we've put together what I believe some great learning tools that are there if you want them, including the ebooks. If you also are interested in doing more, we can arrange for consulting to help you um, manage your organizational silos. And I will tell you, it's not something that's going to help me retire because if I was going to do that, I would have retired a long time ago. But I like to keep my head busy and I love to teach. And then there's actually a couple of motivational books. One is The Process of Becoming Successful, Develop the Passion to Win. And the last one is a book that's designed to give hope to patients and families dealing with cancer and terminal diseases. So that's it. That's my promotion. And take it or leave it. It's
Thanks, John. That was great. That was wonderful. So, people, we have a bunch of people that are online. Who has any questions? And Larry, you always have a question, so we're going to put it on your lap. Mr. ASQ, I have no idea if you have audio yet. Larry's moving his head, but he ain't saying anything. Larry, we got to get you a real headset, my friend.
Chaz is raising his hand. I don't know if he has a question.
Sure, Chaz. Go ahead, buddy.
Can you see me, hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
So, hey, John, just a couple thoughts. So you're familiar with the total cost of ownership, idea and supply management. I heard you talking about procurement, and it's a very holistic way to deal with supply of parts and supply chain. Have you kind of looked at that, or it seems to match very well with this holistic approach?
Well, supply chain, I've looked at it superficially. I'm sure that my brother has looked at it in more depth because he dealt with it when he was working in the business world and the companies that he worked for. Uh, but this may sound like an oversimplification, but any organization can be broken down into the individual parts, no matter what that organization is. So supply chain, I'm sure there are a ton of silos in it, and it would just be a matter of finding out what they are, investigating them, and see how best to handle them. Does that
Yeah,
answer your
well,
question?
yeah, but I mean, the total cost of ownership is this idea that to get a part in the door, you need to look at everything, logistics, the actual procurement of the parts, the performance of the supplier. So it requires that holistic approach to make that possible. So it just the two ideas kind of match very well from what
Sure.
material you're presenting. So
Well, that could
just
also come under the title of vendor-customer relationship.
yeah. And I guess the other thought was, I guess I mean, my opinion is a lot of the work from home, and then I would even say to a certain degree forced isolation as a result of COVID was really much the fuel to silos, at least that I saw.
I would agree.
And because I think for me the best, and I work for a large company, but the best way to break a silo was to have co-location of the different functions forced together so that problem solving is real time outside of electronic means, and everybody's collaborating with everybody in a very, very close proximity. And it was a beautiful thing, and I mean, people just, it's hard to imagine a day where you get everything done without having to send emails. But it's very powerful.
I I don't
Then
think you
COVID came.
I don't think you could force collaboration, though. There has to be some type of willingness on both sides for that to occur, and realize, one side needs to realize the specialty or the knowledge of the other side, and realize that this collaboration needs to be understanding the skill of the other person, the other team, and how you can bring them together, because that gets into the cross-pollination, because an
Yeah.
idea is going to come from one side and go to the other side.
Yeah. I'm not saying you force the collaboration, but you force the co-location. You can do that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it just, it's one baby step after that, once you do that.
And I will tell you, COVID screwed a lot of things up.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, but very, very interesting material. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
would say one thing about that, by the way, Chaz. So I think co-location is a great solution. I totally agree. But in addition to that, I will say that during the work from home period, and for some of people it's still going on, it's almost easier to get a hold of people from another department. In the old days from purchasing, I would walk down to engineering and they'd be, you know, maybe not at their desk. They'd be working on something somewhere else or in a conference room, whatever. Now it's so much easier for me to at least to get a hold of engineering. I can get a hold of them or finance or accounts payable or IT. I can literally get a hold of people easily. Seems like more
Yeah,
easily than the old
I'm
days.
finding it's easier for the more seasoned employees and the people that have been around longer. I find that
Yep.
it's really challenging for the new employees who don't even know who to call, and they're timid about going electronic, asking what they think might be a stupid question. Or so when
Yeah.
you're in an office and and the problem, what's happening is now all the, I walked into the office today, and well, a different office, just say I'm in the office every day, and and everybody looked like they were like 24. And I'm thinking like, and everybody else that's, over 45 is working remote. And I'm like, well, they're missing something here. So it's
Yeah.
like,
Well, I'll tell you,
so
you can double those ages and you get close to mine. So
no, but my point is I think people that have established those relationships, and then I agree that they find a lot of efficiency, but the people that are really at a disadvantage there.
So what
yeah,
I've been doing, Chaz, is I've been trying to. A lot of the new people will call me and say, "All right, who do I call for this? Who do I call for that?" Because I've been there for 25 years at this company. And what I'll do is I will put on. We use Teams. Put them on the call at the same time as the person they're trying to. They didn't know, but who they need to get a hold of, and me. And I'll introduce. I'll get everyone talking, and I'll have make sure everyone's cameras are on, and it sort of gets the relationship going. Kids today get electronic really well, considering they grew up
Yeah,
on
and
it.
all the people you're getting in touch with are in the office, is what and it's easier.
No, no, they're a lot of them accounts payable and finance, and a lot of them IT
Yeah,
are working
yeah.
from home and they have direct access into every system. So what I'll do is I'll just like we're doing here, I'll put them all together, not this many people, but two or three people on a Teams call, and then we'll all chat with the camera on, and they sort of get to know each other. I mean, if you don't make, I would say, the effort, it doesn't work. And some
well,
Yeah,
people don't, but that won't
I
work.
want to I want
yeah.
to add one thing to that, though, because in today's younger generation of electronics, email, texting, my philosophy is if you email or text 3 times on the same topic, it's time to pick up the phone.
I do that. I do that too. I do that too. I
I
will
actually
call.
wait for the third time to even respond.
I love it.
If it's more than three sentences, I pick up the phone to call them.
Yeah, I like doing that too.
I want
Unusual.
I want to say Larry said team spirit goes a long way. So many worker bees like to keep their talent and knowledge to themselves. How do you make people be free to share their secrets?
That's a good question. Tasers work well. And all kidding aside, um, it it's a matter of establishing some type of a camaraderie, and getting them to understand that holding on to their own knowledge, their own good ideas, does nothing for the company. It does nothing for goal achievement. And it's an attitude adjustment. It really is, and trying to get them to understand that. But it has to be done in a friendly, non-adversarial way, to make them not to show them that their knowledge is important and may be a significant addition to the company, and may even lead to things like a bonus or a promotion. I mean, it's got to be a damn good suggestion in order to get something like that. But the reality is, encourage them to understand that get back to holism. There's no one part, no one person, no organization that's more important than any other. So getting a team concept involved, I think it is an important way to try and adjust that.
Cool. Any more questions? Olivia? You
I don't have
anything?
anything. Nope.
Angelo, team?
So Olivia, are you in Alaska?
Yes, I'm currently in Juneau, Alaska.
Oh, in Juneau, because I've been to Anchorage a couple times.
Mhm.
Matter of fact, we went on a Alaskan cruise and
Mhm.
love it, but just on a short-term basis.
Yes, I am here. My boyfriend's a chief in the U.S. Coast Guard, so we are currently stationed here.
So tell him thank you for his service.
Will do.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So for the people that I did put the survey and the CEU certificate link in the Zoom chat. I also put in the past events, et cetera, et cetera. NESCON, someone asked about the free big conference. I put that link in there. So copy all your links now while you're here, and then you'll have them for the future. Otherwise, I get an email tomorrow. Ah, geez, do you have that link? And I'm like, okay. And that's
And I
okay.
would encourage you to reach out to me for any reason.
That's awesome. And for the people who are shy, I'm going to hit stop recording. And then you can ask, you know how like people, I was telling this to John the other day on our dry run where we were talking, in an in-person one of these events, people line up to talk to the speaker after the event is over, you know, the shyer ones. So for those people, I'm going to hit stop recording and now you can ask questions. So, yeah.
Well, before that happens, I have to jump to a next meeting. So I'm gonna say my goodbyes because I
Have
got
fun.
but it was great seeing everyone and talking with everyone
Bye,
today.
Olivia.
Thank
John, for
you.
your presentation.
Thank you.